If you want a man to become obsessed after 50, hurt his ego, but not by breaking him. Hurt it by refusing to feed it. That sounds brutal and maybe a little wicked, but listen closely. The wound I'm talking about is not cruelty. It's truth. It's the slow, civilized withdrawal of the things many men have learned to depend on. Constant validation, effortless admiration, the safety of always being the center. When a woman over 50 stops performing for his approval, something old and dangerous stirs in him, not because she has diminished, but because she has finally become real. Carl Jung taught that what we refuse becomes our shadow. What we ignore in others becomes a pressure in ourselves. A man's ego, carefully wired to receive certain reflections, will notice that absence. An obsession often begins in that exact hollow. Have you ever watched a man lose his footing when the script changes? He's used to being admired, complimented, followed. He has rehearsed roles: provider, protector, the witty partner at parties. Now imagine the woman who once supplied those cues simply stops. She doesn't flatter, she doesn't over-explain, she doesn't play small. She answers with precision, laughs on her own terms, and most importantly, she refuses to make him feel indispensable. The first thing he feels is confusion. The second thing is hunger. Hunger is the birthplace of obsession, when the familiar mirror refuses to reflect him back. This is not magic, it's psychology. Jung described the anima and animus, the inner feminine within men and the inner masculine within women, as bridges to wholeness. A woman who knows herself well enough to step outside the old choreography forces a man to confront his anima, the part of him that responds to emotional truth rather than to surface charm. When she removes the props, he can no longer project the safe fantasies that fed his ego. He is left standing before himself, and that confrontation can take the form of desperate attraction. But beware, attraction born from wounds is volatile. It is not the gentle bloom of mutual admiration. It is the urgent flame of something awakened and unintegrated. Ask yourself, when was the last time you stopped being easy to please? When did you last allow silence to speak louder than explanation? In a culture that sells the illusion of eternal availability, the decision to withhold is radical. It rewires the dynamic. To hurt his ego is not to humiliate him. It is to remove the scaffolding he relies on. The result is not always immediate worship. More often it is disorientation, and disorientation is fertile ground. The man who once coasted on external adoration begins to notice details he previously ignored. The way she moves, the rhythm of her speech, the small ironies in her laughter. He starts to wonder, who is this woman who doesn't need me to be great? There is a particular cruelty men fear: indifference. Not the angry kind, but the quiet, impenetrable kind. When a woman over 50 meets disrespect with sovereignty rather than pleading, she touches a nerve that younger partners rarely can. Younger women can often chase, flatter, and salvage egos in a loop that never asks the man to change. The mature woman, however, has fewer reasons to perform. She's paid her dues, learned her lessons, and no longer accepts being anyone's emotional scaffolding. That refusal forces a man into an internal audit. Where am I staking my worth? What parts of me are being sustained by someone else's labor? That audit either leads to growth or obsession, sometimes both. Power in this arena is subtle. It is not the loud reclaiming of dominance, nor is it the icy withdrawal that becomes a game. Power is composed of 3 quiet practices: self-possession, selective vulnerability, and relentless boundaries. Self-possession means you are not defined by his gaze. Selective vulnerability means you choose when and to whom to show tenderness. It is not a broadcast. Relentless boundaries mean you do not tolerate behaviors that chip away at your dignity. Each of these acts, when enacted by a woman who has lived and learned, pricks at the ego that expects uncomplicated submission. The man who meets them must either step into complexity and become more interesting in the process, or he will spiral into attempts to reclaim what he's lost: attention, control, perceived value. That spiral often resembles obsession. It is essential to understand the difference between cruelty and strategy. Cruelty shatters, strategy clarifies. If your aim is to make him obsessed in a healthy way, meaning he becomes drawn to you because you are whole, not because he is wounded, then the hurt must be surgical. It's the removal of ego-inflating favors, the refusal to be the default emotional laborer, the quiet exit from the performance stage. The man who has relied on being needed, will either evolve to earn your emotional respect, or he will attempt to force the old dynamic back through attention-seeking or charm. Both responses tell you who he really is. Both are clarifying. There's another dimension here, projection. Men often project their unintegrated longings onto women. A woman under 50 who plays into those projections becomes a mirror that comforts. A woman over 50 who refuses to be malleable becomes a mirror that reflects an uncomfortable truth. The man sees not only her but the years ahead, his own mortality, his aging desires, perhaps unfulfilled potentials. That reflection can be a shock. Jung warned that the shadow contains all the parts we deny. When the mature feminine stands steady, she forces the shadow into the light. The very thing he wanted to avoid, his unfinished business, becomes the most magnetic puzzle of his life. But let me be blunt, this strategy is not for manipulation or petty revenge. It is an invitation to depth. To hurt his ego in this way is to demand that he meet you, not at the level of appearance, not at the level of easy praise, but at the level of emotional accountability. You are asking him to integrate parts of himself that he may have left in the dark. You are daring him to be more than the sum of his compliments. For the man who can answer that call, obsession mutates into devotion. It becomes less about possession and more about reverence. For the man who cannot, it becomes the spectacle of chasing, flattery, and eventually disillusionment. So what does this look like in ordinary life? It looks like saying no without apology. It looks like holding your plans, your time, and your joy intact when he expects access. It looks like telling the truth about what you will accept and what you won't, and following through. It looks like cultivating interests and friendships that are not contingent on his approval. These are small, everyday refusals that accumulatively bruise the ego that depended on constant fueling. The bruise is not a wound of contempt. It's a boundary that teaches him there are limits to what he can expect from you. If you are listening to this and feeling resistance, the worry that this will backfire, that you will be labeled cold or cruel, then pause and ask which is the cruelty. To let him coast in a relationship of dependency, or to ask him to meet you as an equal. In Jungian terms, the wound you inflict is a necessary shock to break the trance of performance. It is the call to individuation for him, whether he chooses it or not. And remember, the effect is never guaranteed. Some men will rise, some will run. Your role is not to fix him. It is to be whole enough that his response reveals his true character. There is more to this than technique. There is a moral gravity that underpins it. When you withhold the habitual props for his ego, you are asking for honesty from both of you. Obsession born from that honesty is rarer and deeper than the shallow fixation of youth. It asks for reverence, patience, and a willingness to be transformed. If you are willing to risk the temporary discomfort of hurting his ego in this precise, sovereign way, you may find not only that he becomes obsessed, but that he becomes worthy of your attention in ways that flattery never could. And that is the real secret. Hurt that opens a door to depth, not one that slams it shut. Once you've stripped away the performance that fed his ego, something fascinating happens. He starts to study you. Not casually, not in the lazy way men do when they assume they've already won, but carefully. Like a puzzle he suddenly realizes he never solved. He notices the pauses between your sentences, the way your silence has weight. He begins to measure himself against your steadiness. This is not a game. It's a revelation. Men who have lived through decades of being validated, by work, by youth, by admiration, often do not realize how fragile that validation is until it vanishes. It is in that absence that real desire is born. When a woman over 50 withdraws from the invisible labor of holding his ego together, she exposes the architecture of the relationship. She stops carrying both sides. And that is terrifying for him, because suddenly he can feel the imbalance. It was always there, but her generosity kept it hidden. Now he must either rebuild the bridge with his own hands or lose her to the quiet power of her autonomy. And make no mistake, autonomy is intoxicating. A man can smell it. It has a gravity, a pull. This is why the most magnetic woman is not the loudest, nor the most accommodating, nor the one who tries hardest. It is the woman who has outgrown the need to prove. She does not audition for his love. She does not over-explain her boundaries. She stands calmly and unbothered, like a mirror that reflects his ego back to him without distortion. Men who are used to comfort find that unbearable. But the men who have depth find it irresistible. Carl Jung often spoke of the individuation process, the journey toward wholeness, where the shadow is confronted and the ego is tempered by truth. A relationship that provokes growth often begins with discomfort. That discomfort is the wound. When his ego is bruised, when you no longer orbit him, he faces the part of himself he has ignored. He realizes how much he depended on your approval, your softness, your giving nature. And in that realization, obsession is born. Not because you hurt him in cruelty, but because you revealed his dependency. Women over 50 carry a kind of emotional authority that cannot be faked. It is earned. They've survived heartbreaks, betrayals, silences, and years of giving too much. They've learned the difference between love and dependency. That authority is devastatingly powerful when directed with precision. It doesn't scream. It doesn't chase. It simply withdraws the illusion that she exists to hold him up. And he feels that withdrawal like oxygen leaving the room. Here's the uncomfortable truth many men face. They crave what they can't control. Not because they are evil, but because control has been their compass. When you step out of the role that keeps him secure, he has two options: chase the control or chase you. One leads to obsession, the other leads to his own growth. Either way, you are no longer the one bending. The most powerful moment comes when you no longer perform to keep him interested, when you stop making yourself smaller, softer, easier. You begin to move through the world with the gravity of someone who knows she is enough. And that changes the chemistry between you. It's not that you become colder. You become untouchable. Not unreachable. Untouchable in the sense that your worth is no longer something he can manipulate. That's when obsession turns into pursuit. Men who are used to being admired find themselves working to earn your gaze, not because you are playing hard to get, but because your attention is now selective. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When you stop feeding his ego, you make his unconscious hunger conscious. He starts asking himself why your absence stings more than other women's rejection, why your silence echoes louder than anyone else's words. And that is the secret. Obsession is not born from abundance. It's born from loss. Not the dramatic loss of cruelty, but the subtle loss of easy power. You are no longer the stage he stands on, and now he must build his own. The woman over 50 who understands this holds a quiet kind of leverage, not over him, but over herself. She can choose what kind of energy to accept. She can choose what kind of man she will allow into her life. And she can do this because she no longer needs a man to validate her existence. This self-possession is what triggers the deepest, most consuming kind of desire in a man who has spent years being adored, the desire to deserve you. Now, let's talk about what happens next, when obsession sets in. It doesn't look like a 25-year-old's frantic texting or jealous games. It looks more subtle. He starts showing up more. His conversations shift. He listens differently. He tries to match your energy, your calm, your confidence. And if he can't match it, he tries to win it back. Because what's been taken from him isn't just attention. It's the mirror in which he saw himself as powerful. To have it again, he must rise. This is where boundaries become crucial. A bruised ego can love, but it can also cling. A man obsessed can either become deeper or more desperate. Your power lies in how you respond. Do you soften the wound too soon, giving him back the comfort he craves? Or do you stand firm, letting him meet you at your level or walk away? Remember, your job is not to heal the part of him that resists growth. Your job is to remain the woman who no longer shrinks. A man's ego at 50 is fragile in ways even he doesn't fully grasp. Age has given him power, but it has also made him more aware of his mortality, of time slipping, of chances narrowing. When a woman at this stage refuses to play the script, she forces him to see that power and age do not entitle him to her devotion. That realization cuts deep, and in that cut, he either bleeds resentment or becomes consumed with wanting to be enough for her. This is why the most magnetic woman isn't the one who tries to be everything he wants. She's the one who refuses to be anything less than what she is. Powerful conclusion. Approx. 700 words. Let's tell the truth most people don't say out loud. When a man loses the woman who once fed his ego, he doesn't miss her at first. He misses the way she made him feel about himself. That's the wound. And for a man over 50, that wound is not a small scratch. It's a fracture that reverberates through his identity, because at this age, he's spent decades believing the world will always reflect his importance back to him. But when that reflection disappears, he's left staring at something he hasn't faced in years: himself. No applause, no admiration, no soft landing, just the echo of his own worth. And if that echo feels empty, he begins to crave the one who forced him to hear it. Obsession isn't just about desire. It's about power. It's about the place you once held in his inner story. When you stop orbiting him, you become something he can't fully grasp anymore. And what a man cannot grasp, he cannot control. And what he cannot control, he obsesses over. Not every man can handle this kind of woman, but the ones who can, they are transformed by her. This is why hurting his ego isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of clarity. It separates the ones who only wanted to be adored from the ones who are capable of meeting you as an equal. The man who truly desires you will not resent your strength. He will rise to it. He will grow into it. And he will respect it. A woman over 50 has already learned what it means to lose herself in someone else's story. She's given, sacrificed, bent and carried weight that was never hers. So when she finally decides to stop, when she lets his ego starve her, it isn't revenge, it's rebirth. It's the reclaiming of her time, her energy, her worth. And here's the most exquisite part. Once you stop feeding a man's ego, you begin feeding your own soul. You redirect all that emotional labor inward. You become radiant in ways you couldn't when you were busy sustaining someone else's illusion. That radiance is what drives him mad, because now he sees you not as an extension of him, but as someone he could lose. Carl Jung believed that we are drawn to the people who reflect our unconscious back to us. You standing in your power become that mirror. The man who cannot bear his own reflection will try to break the mirror, but the man who is ready to evolve will kneel before it, not out of submission, but out of reverence. Obsession is powerful, but your power is greater than his obsession. Your worth is not measured by how much a man desires you, but by how little you need his desire to define your life. If he becomes obsessed, let it be because of your strength, not because of your performance. If he pursues, let it be because you are whole, not because you are convenient. You are not here to feed his ego. You are here to live fully, to love only when it is worthy of you, to stand in a power that only grows richer with time. And if a man wants to stand beside that, truly, he must earn it, not expect it. That is the ultimate reversal. For years, women have been told to earn a man's devotion. But the truth is, the most magnetic power a woman can have is to require a man to rise to meet her. And when he realizes you will not bend, when he sees that your warmth is not owed but chosen, that's when obsession takes root. But by then, you won't be waiting. You'll be walking, forward, radiant, unstoppable.